Imagine you're at a massive party with hundreds of people. Now, without actually knowing anyone, you naturally gravitate towards the group that is discussing about your favorite TV show or planning the next hiking trip. Now, scale this up to billions of users online. That is exactly what Facebook does with clustering, another machine learning algorithm that is unsupervised. It groups people into communities based on their likes, interactions, and connections, creating a digital map of shared interests. But this technique is not only limited to large technology companies, it is also used in the healthcare industry. At Mayo Clinic, patients are grouped by symptoms to provide personalized treatment. And Pfizer uses the technique of clustering to combine chemical compounds for the discovery of life-saving drugs. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Selina, and in this week's video we are going to understand the intuition behind clustering, a powerful unsupervised machine learning algorithm. We'll take this video forward by asking more and more complex questions and end it with a Python implementation. So let's jump right in. Let me first give you a formal definition of clustering. So clustering is a technique that groups similar data points together based on their characteristics, allowing patterns to be discovered in unlabeled data. Well, I know this sounds a little bit tricky, so let's understand this with an example. So imagine that you're at a library and you need to segregate books into different genres. Now you don't know which book belongs to which genre. So you will find some basic characteristics first. Like you will look at the writing style, the cover, the topics of the books, and you will segregate them. There might be a section for sci-fi, one might be for self-help, and one might be for mystery. So this way you have clustered the books and separated them. So even though you didn't know the genre upfront, you looked for similarities in the data and you found patterns. And this is simply how clustering works. I think by this point, you won't be surprised when I say that the roots of clustering not only lie in the field of statistics, but also in the field of psychology. That's right. Francis Galton introduced correlation analysis, connecting data points like never before. But the real story of clustering began in 1939 when psychologist Robert Tryon started implementing clustering by grouping individuals together to understand human behavior. Soon, scientists applied this to biological taxonomy using hierarchical clustering to understand and classify species and uncover relationships in the natural world. So now that we have understood what clustering is and what was its origin, let us move on to understand the different types of clustering and how they work. The first type is K-Means clustering, in which we divide the data into K clusters by assigning each data point to the nearest cluster center or centroid. This process is mostly used for customer segmentation, image compression, and anomaly detection. Let us look at this example to understand K-means clustering. Initially, we have decided that we need three clusters. So in this example, we have K equals 3. Next, we pick the random points on the graph as the starting cluster centers or centroids. So here you can see the crosses are the centroids that we have randomly picked in the beginning, and they are 3 in number. Over here, the x-axis and the y-axis represents the coordinates of our data points in 2D space. We'll start with iteration number 1 and go till iteration number 10. For each data point, we calculate the distance to each centroid and assign the point to the closest centroid. So for all of these data points, we'll calculate the distance and we'll assign it. Similarly, we'll do it for the red region and for the blue region. Here you can see in the beginning, as we have randomly assigned the centroids, they are completely wrong because none of these regions lie in whatever space we want them to. There is no clear distinction or decision boundary. So for each cluster, we calculate the average position of all the points, and this becomes the new position of the centroid. We reassign the points to the nearest centroid and repeat this process until the centroids stop moving significantly, as in iteration 10. As a result, the data is grouped into three clusters, with each cluster having a centroid that best represents its group of points. The next type is hierarchical clustering, which forms a tree-like structure called a dendrogram, which is essentially a nested grouping of data points. The best part about this is that you don't need to define the number of clusters in advance. There are two types, agglomerative and divisive. Agglomerative is used for gene expression analysis and divisive is used for data exploration. Let us now understand them with a visualization. Let us take a look at agglomerative hierarchical clustering, which is a bottom up approach where each data point starts as its own cluster and it is merged step by step until all the points belong to one cluster. So, for our example, you can see we have points from P0 to P6. That means there are 7 points. And initially, we have plotted the 7 points on the x axis. This means, these 7 line means that we have 7 distinct clusters in the beginning. Now we'll start grouping them one by one based on their Euclidean distance, and the clusters will reduce in number. So here you can see that P5 and P6 are closest to each other. So we group them, and the distance between them is somewhere between 0 and 1. And next, this P5 and P6 becomes our one cluster and it is clubbed with P4. So, as you just saw, P5 and P6 were grouped together, and after that, this cluster C1 was grouped with P4. So, together it made one single cluster known as C2. Now, we'll find the next group of clusters that are closest to each other. So, here you can see that P1 and P2 were closest to each other. So P1 and P2 grouped together. And then this cluster of P1 and P2 was closest to P0. So together they formed another cluster known as C4. So now we are left with only 3 clusters. Finally, all of the clusters get grouped together. So you can see now we are left with only one single big cluster. Now you can divide this dendrogram based on the number of clusters that you find are correct. Let us take a look at the difference between agglomerative and divisive hierarchical clustering. So, in the case of agglomerative clustering, it is a bottom up approach. In this, we start with each data point as its own cluster and gradually we merge the closest or the most similar clusters together. So, here you can see that. And we keep merging until all the points are in a single cluster or you reach a desired number of clusters. Next, we have divisive clustering. It is a top to down approach. We start with all the data points in one big cluster, and gradually we split the cluster into smaller and more specific clusters. And we keep splitting until every point is its own cluster, or you reach a desired number of clusters. Our third type is density-based clustering, which groups data points that are close to each other based on a distance metric and are surrounded by a dense neighborhood. One of its examples is dbScan, that is usually used for geospatial clustering. So over here you can see there are 4 main regions. There is the outside boundary, then there is this region, and finally this region over here. So eventually at the end we should be getting 4 clusters. dbScan finds groups of points that are close together and they have enough neighbors and it groups them together. Points that are far away from dense regions are classified as noise. So let us look at this video to visualize it better. So you can see all the points that are close in this region are forming one single cluster. Next, it moves on to this bigger cluster. And then it will move on to this one and then this one. So here you can see finally, as we wanted, we have 4 clusters. And this was all based on the density of the region. One of the major challenges in K-means clustering is choosing the optimal number of K. Having a value of K to be too large or too small can lead to inefficient clustering. To solve this problem, we use the elbow method. Let us now look at a Python implementation of K-means clustering along with visualizations using Colab and scikit-learn. So we start by importing the necessary libraries. First we have NumPy. It provides efficient array operations. Then we have matplotlib.pyplot, which is essential for visualizing the clusters and the results of our K-means algorithm. Next we have sklearn.cluster, from which we are importing K-means. This means that we implement the K-means clustering algorithm using this. And finally, from datasets, we import make blobs. Now, this is convenient for generating synthetic datasets with specified cluster properties. So, step one is generating the sample data. So, over here, x and y are the coordinates of the data points in 2D space. And using make blobs, we are generating 300 samples with 4 centers. So, here you can see altogether these are 400 samples, and there are 4 centers as you can see. Next step is visualizing the generated data. So, here you can see that. Finally, we apply the K-means clustering algorithm by initializing K-means with the number of clusters K. Here we have 4 clusters. We are initializing them randomly, and n in it means the number of iterations that we are going to perform. So we are going to perform 10 iterations, and in each iteration there will be 300 runs. So you can change these values as per your requirement. Next, we fit the model as is visible over here. Finally, we get the cluster centers and labels. So the output of our algorithm is are the coordinates of the cluster centers and their labels like 0, 1, 2, 3. So we use the centroids variable, and to this we assign k-means.cluster centers, that is their location on the 2D space, and their labels. Finally, we visualize the clustering results. So you can see they have been shown in different colors. Next, we will see their centers. So here it is clearly visible that these 4 red crosses are the centroids that are finally achieved, or the cluster centers. Next, if you want to predict the clusters for new data points, that is also possible because we have already trained the model. So we give this as input, that is the new points for which we want to define the cluster centers, and then we put it into k-means.predict, which will finally predict to which cluster it will belong. So you can see, for example, 2, comma 2 will belong to the 1th cluster. So over here, 2, comma 2 will lie somewhere here, and it will belong to this cluster. So the label for this must be 1. Similarly for other points. And at the end, we can visualize the new data points. So here you can see these are the data points that we took, 2, comma 2, and further on, like over here you can see 2, comma 2, 6, comma 6, and minus 2, comma 4. And they have been given their allotted space. That was all for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it and got to learn something new this week. And if you did, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll be back next week with another intuition behind another machine learning algorithm. Till then, thank you for watching and see you again in the next video.